New Zealanders have woken up this morning to tragic news of the events that have been unfolding in the Wellington region as a result of the fire. I want to begin by extending my condolences to those who have lost their lives and their families. And I also want to, on behalf of the whole country, extend our support to the first responders who are on the scene, particularly our firefighters, our police, our ambulance services and others who are working to secure the situation, to get people out of the building and to deal with obviously the aftermath of this fire. It is an absolute tragedy. It is a horrific situation, and in the fullness of time, of course, there'll be a number of investigations about what has happened and why it happened. But for now, the focus clearly has to be on dealing with the situation. The local members of Parliament, Paul Eagle and Grant Robertson, Paul Eagle is on the scene, Grant Robertson is on his way over there to make sure that all of the support necessary is being provided to those people who have been evacuated.
Do you have any update on the number of fatalities?
Look, again, there'll be ample opportunity to have a look at this in coming days. There'll be a number of investigations, including the police, the coroner, and so on. And we need to allow those investigations to take place. And I'm sure that there will be things that will need to be followed up as a result of those.
Do you have any update on the number of fatalities?
The latest advice that we've had from police, of course, who the people who confirm, is that it's less than 10 at this point. They haven't got a specific number, but less than 10 is the current number that they have given us.
Have you had any briefing on whether the building was up to code, whether there were sprinklers in that building, whether the fire alarms were working, and what kind of fire exit strategies there were?
So the Wellington City Council, of course, do building inspections for buildings of this nature. I understand that there was a recent building inspection, but of course that's probably a question better addressed to the council, who would have the most up-to-date information about building inspection records. Again, it's purely hypothetical. We don't have any information on that at this point.
It has been confirmed by fire that there weren't sprinklers in the building. What is your understanding of how many buildings in New Zealand, multi-storey buildings like this, don't have sprinkler systems in them?
There could be quite a large number. Obviously, the building code does not require the retrofitting of sprinkler systems into existing older buildings, and so there'll be a number of buildings that fall into that category.
So basically, sprinklers are nice to have and not a must for these sorts of buildings.
Of course, for older buildings, there are fewer requirements than for newer buildings, and so people who have apartments and so on in older buildings where they've been there for a long time, there may not be sprinklers required in those buildings.
Prime Minister, why are you going down to the site today?
And primarily just to provide support to the people who are responding. Obviously, it's a really difficult situation there. My visit's likely to be a relatively brief one. I do want to be able to offer support to those who have been dealing with a pretty tragic set of circumstances and let them know that the New Zealand community is behind them. Our local members of Parliament will be working with people in the evacuation centre to make sure that they're getting all of the support that they need.
Is there any indication that any of the
I don't have any information on who they are.
Can I go back to the sprinklers question? Is that something the government will look to review, whether there should be sprinklers in multi-storey buildings?
I wouldn't rule things in or out at this point. I mean, clearly there's a process that we need to go through because we need to understand what's happened here, and so I think making kind of preemptive judgment calls before we know what's happened, I think would be unwise. But clearly we have regulations around rental accommodation, around hostels. There's a reason that we have those regulations.
Prime Minister, is there any suggestion that some maybe visitors to New Zealand?
I don't have any information on that. Sorry, I don't have any information on who the victims might be.
Hostels being used as housing for transit people?
My understanding is there's a number of shift workers in there. There's a number of MSD clients in there, although it is not an emergency accommodation, not currently being used for emergency accommodation. But my understanding is that there will be a number of MSD clients and there are a number of people who are working shifts and so on.
Regarding the reviews, so there was a period coroners, police. Is there any appetite for the government, central government, to do a sort of unique review on the building regulation, for example?
Too early at this point. I think let's let them get the fire out. Let's get an understanding of the nature of what we're dealing with. With these things, at this early stage, I'd never rule out doing something extra in terms of review. But clearly there are a number of existing reviews that automatically kick in, and it's important that we allow those things to happen because there's already legal processes that would kick in a situation like this.
How long will it take?
What impact will this have on the people in there? Are there people in there who've lost everything?
It's short-term sort of hostel type accommodation, so there will be people in there who potentially are in quite a vulnerable situation, and so that is one of the reasons why through the evacuation centres we need to make sure we're providing them with all the support possible.
How long do you expect it'll take to get a body count?
The understanding I have at the moment is that the police aren't able to access the building because it's still too high risk, and so I think until they are able to do that, it's likely that we won't be able to get a confirmed number.
So days?
I think that will very much depend on how long it takes for them to make sure the fire is fully out and to get the building to a stable point where they can get in.
Is there any indication then that people might be trapped in there?
I don't have any information on that, so fire and emergency would be we'll provide regular updates on that.
Have you got a message for the fire and emergency first responders who were on scene this morning?
I want to acknowledge that this will have been an incredibly traumatic event to respond to for our first responders. These are people who put themselves in harm's way on behalf of all of us on a regular basis, and I just want to acknowledge, whilst they train for these sorts of things, being confronted with the reality of it will have been incredibly difficult, and I know the whole country will be grateful to them for their efforts and will be very supportive of their actions.
And have you been in contact with any of the family members of those that died in the fire, or do you plan to?
No, at this point, like I said, at this point I don't have any information on who they are.
Minister, we know that emergency housing is hugely under pressure. Where are we expecting to house these people that have lost everything?
So we've got MSD are on site at the moment. I'm sure if we need to, the temporary accommodation service will be made available as well. We'll work very hard to make sure they have a roof over their head.
We have enough space in the system?
We'll work hard to make sure that we can find somewhere for them to stay.
Just with your briefings and things this morning, what happened? Was it the ministers all getting together in your office? Was it a Teams call? How did you get that briefing and how are you keeping across this?
So obviously, first thing this morning, is largely just information coming in via phone. Before we're doing my morning media rounds, I've just had an opportunity to sit with the relevant ministers to get an update in terms of what they know. But we will certainly be keeping up to date with the details across the day.
Do any of those overarching like crisis management units kick in for something like this, or is it not quite because it's not at a national level?
Certainly some of the information that I've been receiving has been coming through NEMA, who obviously in an event that involves multiple agencies will play a role depending on the nature of the need. At this point, fire and emergency are the first responders coordinating the situation on the ground.
Did fire and emergency have the resource that they needed to respond to that fire this morning?
They've pulled resource in from across the region. With an event of this scale, you would expect that to be the case.
Is it maybe a wake-up call that we need to resource them better?
Look, I think, I acknowledge that we've got work to do in terms of making sure our first responders, fire and emergency, have the gear that they need in order to be able to respond to every situation that they might face.
We heard of reports of fire and emergency pulling people off the roof, and that was the only way that they could have lived, otherwise they would have perished. Are you surprised that it came to that? In New Zealand, in a New Zealand building?
There are obviously standards around evacuations and around making sure that there are fire escapes and so on. The responsibility for checking those and for doing the building inspections, that sits with the local authority. So questions around whether or not the building had up to date fire evacuation plans and so on, that sits with the Wellington City Council.
There have been several weekends or weeks this year when Wellington has not been able to field an appliance with a ladder because of under-resourcing and fire. Were you able to field an appliance with a ladder today?
That's a question for fire and emergency. I don't have that level of specific information, but I do know that resource has been pulled in from across the Wellington region, and clearly we've got work to do to update and upgrade some of the outdated equipment that
Shouldn't
fire and
cities like
emergency
Wellington
rely on.
always be able to field an appliance with a ladder? There are lots of tall buildings in Wellington, and if some of them don't have sprinklers, then surely you'd need a ladder.
I might hand over to the Minister for Fire and Emergency. We'll just play a shuffle.
So I can't confirm if a ladder was needed, or what I have been advised is 20 crews across the Wellington region responded to today's events.
How long did they take to respond? Were there any issues with between the time the fire started and 111 being called?
I haven't been advised regarding times. Fire Emergency New Zealand will keep me informed as the day progresses.
In terms of the actual people who were involved, do you have any updates on who they were, their ages, whether there were any children?
No, not at this time. Again, it's very early on in investigations that happened. But again, Fire Emergency New Zealand will keep me informed as the day progresses.
Did you ask whether there was a ladder needed?
No, because I have trust and confidence in Fire Emergency New Zealand to do their job.
So you'd be disappointed if there wasn't?
Again, I have trust in Fire and Emergency New Zealand to respond accordingly.
Vanessa, can I just ask, this is not the first tragedy in the last week where regulations and health and safety have been called to question. We've obviously had the horrificness of the cave incident as well. Should New Zealanders be concerned about regulations and health and safety in New Zealand?
I think if you look at the trend over the last decade or so, there's been a significant tightening of health and safety regulations. I think tragedies like this reinforce the need for that. They reinforce why we have regulations in place. So when people are talking about, cutting red tape and removing regulation in areas like this, it just underscores that those regulations are in place for a reason.
Just on that too, while we're here, the cabinet incident, have you had any further information or updates about that investigation?
Not yet, no, but I'll keep you posted when I do.
Just when you were first informed of the fire, is it sort of wake up the PMs of the incident, or first thing?
I was already awake early because I was doing the early morning media round, but as soon as I sort of logged in to check my briefings before doing the morning media round, so that would have been sometime between 6 and 7. Okay, thanks everybody. Cheers.
Explain to me what's happened.
So as we know, the fire broke out around about 12, just after 12, and our fire and emergency team have worked tirelessly through the night to put that out. Unfortunately, as we know, we have multiple fatalities, which is truly tragic and heartbreaking for our community. So my heart and aroha goes out to the families impacted. But I also really want to thank our fire and emergency team for the mahi that they've done this morning. It is truly heroic, and we did get over 50 people evacuated who are now being taken care of at an emergency centre.
Have you got any information about how this happened or what happened here?
Not at this stage, but there is an urgent inquiry being done about this, run by the police. Our council will obviously have input as well, and I'm committed to finding out what has gone wrong here, who's at fault, and of course what we can do to avoid that in the future.
And I noticed when you were down here first thing this morning, you shed a few tears. It's obviously quite an emotional thing for you.
Yeah, so when I first got here, I was initially of the view that everyone had made it out, but then about 1 minute before I got on camera, we'd received word that there had been multiple deaths, and I think for me and everyone who was in that space at the time, it was deeply emotional. So I shed some tears, and I think me and many others will continue to do so, especially as more details become available.
Can you explain Loafers Lodge? What is it? It's been described as a hotel, but it's more a kind of boarding house kind of thing, is that right?
Yeah, more of a hostel type situation. So there's a real mixture of short to long term residents. From what I know, those probably on the more vulnerable side as well, which makes this even more heartbreaking. But that will become, again, that information will become available over the coming days.
Cool. Fens has confirmed there's no sprinklers in the building. But I mean, what do you make of that? There's at least 52 people in there, plus more, no sprinklers. Is that acceptable?
Oh, that's terrifying to me. And when the time is right, we'll be holding the right people to account. But at the moment, I just want to focus on those who have lost their lives.
And can you explain to me that the council's cancelled quite a major event tomorrow, what that is?
Yeah, so we had the Tākina Convention Centre opening tomorrow night with about 700 people in attendance. It would be deeply inappropriate to continue with that, so we've pushed that to the 31st of May, and the catering that was involved in that event will be donating to those who need it tomorrow.
I think that's pretty much all we need. Oh, actually, sorry, one last thing. Do you want to talk to me about the Mayoral Relief Fund you've set up?
Oh, yes, of course. So we've set up a Mayoral Relief Fund. We're just sorting the details into how much the council will be putting in. But for the public who would like to contribute, we've set it up through the Wellington City Mission on their website. They're facilitating it. So I'm putting a call out to our Wellington community. This is the time. This is a time to look after our whānau. There will be those who are in deep need over the coming days and weeks, so give all you can.
And what will the money actually be going to? The people here to rebuild? What's the money for?
Probably just into their kind of living situation, mental health support, I would imagine. I know the government is working with council to look at more temporary housing, but that information, once it's available, I'll put that out.
Nice one, cheers, Tori. Nailed it.